you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify here today and for holding this important hearing. Representative Franks, I'm sorry about the loss in the Super Bowl, but as coming from Michigan with the 0-16 Lions, we respect the fact that your team was able to get as far as it did. To fully appreciate the impact of the Bush administration's last-minute rules as they affect working people, it's important to contrast what the administration did do in its final months in office with what it didn't do during the 8 years that the Bush administration was in charge. The Bush administration was one that, with rare exception, refused to issue significant rules to protect worker health and safety, refused to issue rules to improve workers' wage and hour protections, except in unusual circumstances. The only major wage and hour rulemaking that the administration conducted was to weaken overtime protections for workers. And then suddenly, this same administration ratcheted up its rulemaking activity in its final months and rushed out a number of rules that are harmful to workers. I've described a number of these rules in my written testimony: rules on conflicts of interest in providing investment advice to workers receiving 401ks, rules making it harder for workers to take Family and Medical Leave, rules that increase the number of hours truckers can be required to drive to the detriment of their health and the public's health and safety. But in the time that we have available this morning, I'd like to highlight the Department of Labor's last-minute rules on the H-2A and H-2B visa programs, because I think they're illustrative of midnight rulemaking at its worst. Significant rules that are rushed through the process in a deliberate effort to cement an outgoing administration's policy views and foist them on the incoming administration to the detriment of workers. The H-2A and H-2B visa programs provide visas to allow employers to hire foreign workers on a temporary basis in the agriculture and seasonal industries in situations where there are not enough workers available for the jobs. For years, the system had safeguards in place to protect U.S. and foreign workers and to prevent abuse. For example, there was a government pre-hire certification process through which the federal government and state agencies verified employers' claims that there were not enough domestic workers to do the jobs in question. The H-2A program had wage standards, other labor protections, like the 50% rule, that created incentives for employers to hire U.S. workers rather than going and hiring foreign workers. The H-2B program was limited to temporary jobs of no more than 10 months duration. Under the new rules, temporary has now been redefined as up to 3 years, which is hardly a temporary job. These protections were eliminated by the Bush administration in its new H-2A and H-2B rules that were rushed through the process, issued in December, well after the supposed November 1st deadline in the Bolton memo, and allowed to take effect in the minimum 30 days allowed by the Administrative Procedure Act rather than the usual 60 or more days that is typical for significant rules of this nature. We are very concerned that these new rules are going to disadvantage U.S. workers, drive down wages, and weaken protections for both U.S. and H-2B and H-2A foreign workers. They're a prime example of midnight regulations that need to be stopped through a congressional rider or through disapproval under the Congressional Review Act. So what can be done about rules like this? As I mentioned, Congress has tools available through legislative riders and through the Congressional Review Act. The administrative agencies also have tools available to them to undo what they view as problematic rules. As other witnesses have commented, of course, the problem is that doing a new rulemaking takes time. And with respect to the H-2A, H-2B rules, and many of these other midnight rules, the rules are already in effect. And so the clock is ticking, and the harmful consequences of the new rules are taking hold during the time period that the new administration is doing a new rulemaking to try to undo these harmful effects of the rule. So there's some urgency to taking action to address what are viewed as the most egregious problematic midnight rules. There's also a resource impact on agencies. Every dollar spent by agencies undoing a bad rule is a dollar that they don't have available to spend on issuing new, good, protective rules. So we would urge Congress to take this into consideration and to make sure that the regulatory agencies have the money in hand to both deal with problems left by the prior administration as well as to get on with the business of protecting workers and the public health and environment in this new administration. I like to just make one last comment, which is I think you're hearing some agreement here today that not all midnight rules are the same, and there are midnight rules where we might disagree with the policy outcome or the policy decision of the former administration, and there are examples where we do, but the rules didn't shortcut the process. There were lengthy public comment periods. There was lengthy deliberation of the rules. Nobody was really surprised that the rules came out. They might have been disappointed, but they weren't surprised. I would say that the Family and Medical Leave Act rules are an example of that. We knew those rules were coming. We don't like aspects of them. We don't object to other aspects of them, and we hope that the new administration working with Congress will address the problems in those rules, but they weren't really midnight in the same sense of the H-2A, H-2B rules, the rules on investment advice that I mentioned, that were started and finished and made effective in the very few last months of the Bush administration. That is the category of midnight rules that are of particular concern to us, and I would think would be of particular concern to the Congress. Thank you.